Hi, everyone. My name is Jesse Robbins, and welcome to LPLE from Dialogue FM. We're the podcast that lets you practice listening in English. We speak English slowly and clearly so that you can follow along and understand native English speakers more easily. I'm excited to help you improve your English listening skill, as well as help you learn new vocabulary, grammar, and idioms commonly heard in conversations among native English speakers. If you want to practice listening in English, then we invite you to join our conversation. Hi, Jane.
Hi, Jesse.
This past week has been a very interesting week.
It certainly has, and I have said more than once that if I could just be a fly on the wall, I would be very interested, and I would think this was an amazing, fascinating time. But since I'm an actual person who has to live with what has happened, I don't know what to think. How about you?
I'm still processing. I'm still trying to think about what is going to happen now that we have a new president and his name is Donald Trump. For this episode, I'd like to talk to you about the election, not about the politics, but more about how we feel when we watched the election and when we found out the result. Now, you said a phrase, fly on the wall. I'm going to use that phrase again later on in this podcast. But for our listeners, to be a fly on the wall means to be an invisible observer, right? So to be on fly on the wall means you want to listen to a conversation and you don't want the people having that conversation to notice you.
Right, and you're not involved in the situation at all.
That's correct.
Sometimes we use it when we wish we could have heard something that we know happened. We'll say, oh, I wish I could have been a fly on the wall when something happened.
Right.
Yeah.
The election was last Tuesday.
Just 1 week ago.
Exactly. And for me, and I know for you as well, heck, I think most of America, we were really excited and also a little bit nervous about the election. Now, again, we don't need to talk too much about the individual characteristics of Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. I'm sure our listeners have probably read about it multiple times. I want to reflect on what we were doing that day and how we felt when we found out. So what were you doing during the election day?
I had just returned from a trip and I was visiting my family, and it was a normal day. I wasn't working. It was a normal, pleasant day with family. But we were looking forward to watching the election. We thought that Hillary Clinton would win, but we weren't certain. And when we started to see the result, which very quickly looked very close, and it all happened very fast. I have never been so surprised and shocked. And I think I remember talking to my mother and saying, oh, wait a minute, they haven't counted the votes from California. No problem. And then I saw that the votes from California were already included. They were not the actual popular votes, but it was already known that California would belong to Hillary Clinton, and these famous electoral votes, 55 of them, had already been included in her number. It was very shocking. And what might be interesting is the fact that most Americans take the presidential election very personally. I'm not sure if all countries do. I think not. We do have this belief, whether or not it's true, that we have a voice, that this is supposed to be our government, and we do take it personally. And in this case, for half the country, more than half the country, was terribly shocked.
I was following the election for about 18 months, ever since the beginning of last year, maybe?
Yes.
So I, like you said, took this election very personally. I hosted a party, actually in this house, where we're recording this podcast. I invited about 15 to 20 friends. All of us had voted for and supported Hillary Clinton. At this party, people brought food and snacks, chips, candies, beer, alcohol. It was truly going to be a celebration party because we were all confident, except me, and I'll explain that in a bit. We were all confident that Hillary Clinton would win and that America would have its first woman president. I came to the house first so that I could set up the TV, I could prepare some of the snacks, and so that I could also start watching some of the news coverage about the early state polls. Now, if you're listening to this, remember, Jane, right? Jane, you and I are in America, and America has 4 time zones: East, Central, Mountain, and Pacific, right? So during the election time, most of the polls start closing first on the East Coast, Eastern Time. So about 5 o'clock Pacific Time, where we live, that's when we can start to see which candidate won which state. So at about 5 o'clock, we started to see some results come in. Now, when I saw most of the states go to Trump, I thought to myself, okay, there's still time, right? We still have the states in the Central Time Zone, the states in the Mountain Time Zone, and definitely all of the states in the Pacific Time Zone, are going to go to Hillary, so let's not worry too much yet. And then 6 o'clock came, and I started to get more nervous. At about 7 o'clock, I had convinced myself that it was over. Most of my friends were still hoping that Hillary would win, but I had my phone in my hand and I was checking the New York Times website. And the New York Times website had this interesting feature. On the New York Times website, they had this graph, like a car. You know, the car has a speedometer. There's a needle that moves, right?
Yeah.
Well, the same thing. They had this needle where the needle on the left, on the left side of this graph was Hillary's probability of winning. The center was equal probability, and then on the right side was Trump's probability of winning. By about 7 or 8 o'clock, the needle on that graph was pretty much 100% in Donald Trump's area. At that point, I didn't know what to think anymore. Except this is not good. So one by one, my friends started to go home. They started to accept the situation. They started to accept the outcome. My wife and I were the last to leave the party. And as we walked to the car, my wife started crying. She was very emotionally invested in this election, and she was very sad. Like you said, Jane, and the way you said it was perfect. It's a blessing and a curse that we as Americans can take our election personally. We can take our government personally. It's a blessing because we have the right and the freedom to choose our government. It's a curse because if we don't get who we picked, we're very upset. We're sad. We're mad. We're disappointed extremely. Anyway, we go home. It's about late now. It's like 9 or 10 o'clock. We've taken a shower and we're in bed. My wife goes to sleep and I'm still on my phone watching the outcome. Right before I go to sleep, that's when I hear Donald Trump's acceptance speech. And then I go home and then I go to sleep. Okay, so that's the night. Let's talk about the day after. We wake up and we read the news. What goes through your mind when you read the news about the outcome?
I actually asked myself, I was in a different time zone from you. I was in mountain time. So during that time, I asked myself, do you want to go to bed now and not be sure and wake up in the morning not knowing? Or do you want to go to bed knowing? And I chose to go to bed knowing. The next morning, I had the unhappy task of telephoning my husband, who wasn't up yet. And he had chosen the other path. He couldn't stand it. And because we live in a part of the country that voted for Clinton, he was one of those and was very upset. But he decided that it was just too much for him, so he decided to go to bed. So I had to announce it to him. The day was like a death in the family. Very strange. I had the chance to see some old friends, and for a short time, because we hadn't seen each other in a long time, we forgot it for maybe half an hour or something, and we just smiled and laughed, and life seemed normal. But immediately afterwards, There was fear, there was loss, a feeling of grieving, and it was extremely difficult to concentrate on any kind of work. And that actually is getting better, but it's not gone away. It's strange where we live. There are mostly people who voted for Hillary Clinton, as is true in so many cities. My mother lives in a place which is much more mixed. And it was interesting how the people who voted for Trump kind of were afraid to admit it, because even their neighbors may be very angry at them. And that's where the problem is. I keep trying to remind myself that if that many people voted for a person that many of us think is unsuitable, something really sad and important is going on, and we have to wake up and find a way to talk to each other.
The day after, I spent all of the day very confused. We say in a daze.
Yes.
In a daze. I spent most of the day in a daze.
Yes.
Because I just still couldn't believe that someone like Donald Trump could actually become president of our country. So, in order to help myself understand, I continued to read the news and watch TV programs on my computer. But the more I watched and the more I read, the more I became angrier and more frustrated. I was learning about why Donald Trump won, and I knew all of these things in advance. I knew that's the reason why I wasn't 100% confident that Hillary would win. So when I started to read more, and the news and the TV confirmed these beliefs, I was just more angry, because I thought, we knew this. We knew the problems of our country, and yet we didn't want to talk about it. We were so focused on other things like email scandal or something like that. So right now, it's been a week, and you and I are now accepting the situation more than before. Remember how you said, be a fly on the wall? Right now, Donald Trump is meeting with President Barack Obama to learn about what it takes to be president and what Trump will have to do as president. And I really wish that I could be a fly on the wall for those private conversations. From what I hear, Donald Trump appeared surprised to learn just how large the scope of work is to be president. I hope, Jane, that moving forward, you and I can continue to talk about politics, but more importantly, to support each other and to share with our listeners how we feel about the political situation in our country. Thank you for listening to this episode of LPLE. Let's practice listening in English from Dialogue FM. Subscribe to LPLE on iTunes to hear the latest episodes. or listen to past episodes on our website, dialogue.fm. That's dialog.fm. If you have questions or comments about English, or if you would like for us to use a word, grammar, or idiom in our conversation so you can learn how to use it correctly, we would love to hear from you on Twitter at dialogue.fm or Facebook at facebook.com/dialoguefm.